When 18-year-old Barron Trump unexpectedly stepped into a White House press briefing, no one could have predicted the emotional bombshell he was about to drop. Facing a room full of aggressive reporters, the youngest Trump didn't just defend his father, he delivered a speech so raw and powerful that it left the entire nation in stunned silence. What did Barron say that shook America to its core? Watch as a quiet young man finds his voice and changes the course of history. Barron Trump's unexpected entrance into the White House press briefing sent shockwaves through the room. The atmosphere, already tense with reporters firing sharp questions at Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt, shifted instantly as the 18-year-old stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed, murmurs spread, and all eyes locked on the youngest son of former President Donald Trump. Barron, tall and composed, carried himself with a quiet confidence that belied his age. His presence alone was enough to silence the room. The reporters, many of whom had spent years criticizing his father, saw an opportunity. A well-known journalist from a liberal outlet smirked, ready to pounce. The first question came like a dagger. "Barron, your father has been accused of being a dictator. Do you believe he deserves to be in the White House?" The room held its breath, waiting for the young Trump to falter under the pressure. But Barron didn't flinch. He took a slow breath, his piercing blue eyes locking onto the reporter. "With all due respect," he began, his voice steady and firm, "that's a ridiculous question." Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a headline in the making. Barron continued, "My father was elected because millions of Americans believe in him. A dictator doesn't win elections. A dictator doesn't fight for the people." The smirking journalist didn't back down. "But your father has been accused of corruption. How do you respond to that?" Barron held up a hand, cutting him off. "If corruption means fighting for lower taxes, securing our borders, and making America great, then maybe you should redefine your words." The room buzzed with murmurs, but Barron wasn't finished. Another reporter jumped in, aiming to humiliate him. "People say you're privileged, that everything's been handed to you. Do you think you deserve the life you have?" Barron stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "My last name is Trump, but that's not what defines me. I've worked hard, just like millions of Americans. My father taught me that nothing is given. It's earned." The room fell silent. Barron wasn't just defending himself. He was standing up for every hard-working American who had been dismissed or mocked. His calm yet powerful demeanor left the press stunned. What started as an attempt to corner a teenager turned into a moment of profound respect. Barron Trump had not only shocked the room, he had commanded it. Barron Trump stood at the podium, his tall frame commanding the room as reporters fired one aggressive question after another. The first came from a smirking journalist. "Your father has been accused of being a dictator. Do you believe he deserves to be in the White House?" Barron didn't hesitate. His voice was calm but firm as he replied, "With all due respect, that's a ridiculous question. My father was elected because millions of Americans believe in him. A dictator doesn't win elections. A dictator doesn't fight for the people." The room buzzed with murmurs, but Barron held his ground. Another reporter pressed further. "But your father has been accused of corruption. How do you respond to that?" Barron raised a hand, cutting him off. "If corruption means fighting for lower taxes, securing our borders, and making America great, then maybe you should redefine your words." His sharp retort left the room in stunned silence. The reporters, expecting a teenager to crumble under pressure, were instead met with a young man who spoke with conviction and clarity. The questions grew more personal. "People say you're privileged, that everything's been handed to you. Do you think you deserve the life you have?" Barron stepped forward, his voice steady. "My last name is Trump, but that's not what defines me. I've worked hard, just like millions of Americans. My father taught me that nothing is given, it's earned." His words resonated deeply, challenging the narrative that he was merely a product of privilege. Then came the most pointed question yet. "People have criticized your father's character. They say he's a bully. What do you say to that?" Barron's face darkened, but his voice remained calm. "My father is not a bully. He's a fighter. I've seen him at his best and at his worst. I've seen him work harder than any man I've ever known. And let me tell you something, he never stops fighting for this country. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Barron wasn't just defending his father. He was challenging the narrative that had been spun for years. He spoke not just as a son, but as someone who had witnessed the sacrifices and dedication behind the scenes. His confidence and poise left the reporters speechless. In that moment, Barron Trump wasn't just answering questions, he was rewriting the story, one powerful response at a time. Barron Trump's voice grew softer, but more powerful as he shifted the focus from himself to the struggles of everyday Americans. Standing at the podium, he looked out at the room of reporters, his piercing blue eyes scanning the crowd. "You all want to talk about my father, about my family," he began, his tone measured but filled with emotion. "But what about the families out there struggling? What about the Americans who can't afford groceries because of the reckless policies that came before him? What about them?" The room fell into a suffocating silence. For the first time, the press was at a loss for words. Barron continued, his voice steady but carrying the weight of raw emotion. "I see my classmates' parents struggling to afford groceries. I see businesses shutting down because of policies that hurt the working class. I see the veterans my father fought for still being ignored." His words painted a vivid picture of the hardships faced by millions, and the room listened intently. He paused, letting his words sink in, then turned to a female journalist who had tried to shame him earlier. "You think I don't understand struggle?" he asked, his voice firm. "I've watched my family get attacked every single day for years. I've seen my father work harder than anyone I know, only to be called names by the same people who benefit from his policies." The journalist's smirk faltered as Barron's words hit home. Barron's voice rose, stronger now. "You don't have to be poor to understand struggle. You don't have to suffer to care about people who do." His words were a direct challenge to the narrative that he was out of touch. He spoke not just as the son of a president, but as someone who had witnessed the pain and resilience of everyday Americans. Tears welled in the eyes of some in the room, including Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt. Barron's message was clear. He saw the struggles of the people, and he cared. "My father wakes up every day ready to fight for this country," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "He fights for the forgotten men and women, the ones the media ignores, the ones you ignore." In that moment, Barron Trump wasn't just defending his father's legacy. He was standing up for the millions of Americans who felt unseen and unheard. His words left an indelible mark, reminding everyone that leadership isn't just about power. It's about understanding, empathy, and fighting for those who need it. Most had Barron Trump's voice softened as he began to share a deeply personal story, one that revealed the emotional toll of growing up in the spotlight. The room, once buzzing with tension, fell completely silent. "I want to tell you a story," he began, his gaze distant, as if he were reliving the memories. "There was a boy who loved his father, but every time he turned on the TV, he saw the world tearing him apart." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That boy sat in his room, wondering why people hated his father so much. He asked himself, why do they twist his words? Why do they act like he's the enemy when all he wants is to protect his country? Barron's voice trembled slightly, but he pressed on. "That boy was me." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Reporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some lowering their pens, others leaning in, captivated. Barron continued, his voice steady but filled with raw emotion. "For years I watched as you all called my father a monster, a dictator, a racist, and for years I kept silent." He looked out at the room, his blue eyes glistening. "I thought if I just ignored the headlines, the lies, the attacks, maybe they would stop. But I was wrong." His voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. "My father isn't just a president. He's a man, a husband, a father. I've seen him cry when he reads letters from families who lost everything. I've seen him sit for hours with soldiers who sacrificed their bodies for this country. I've seen him wake up before dawn and work until midnight because he refuses to let America fail." Tears welled in Barron's eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He let the world see his vulnerability. "You say he's heartless, but I've seen his heart. You say he's a bully, but I've seen him fight for the people no one else would fight for. My father isn't perfect, but he loves this country more than himself, and that's why I'm proud to be his son." The room erupted into applause, a rare moment of unity in the often divided press corps. Barron's story wasn't just a defense of his father, it was a window into the pain and resilience of a family that had endured relentless scrutiny. In sharing his truth, Barron Trump didn't just silence his critics, he reminded the world that behind the headlines and the politics, there are real people with real emotions, fighting for what they believe in. Barron Trump stood at the podium, his tall frame commanding the room as he prepared to deliver the most impactful words of the day. The press briefing, once filled with aggressive questions and tension, had transformed into a moment of profound significance. Barron's voice, calm yet resolute, cut through the silence. "I didn't come here today to defend my father," he began, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room. "He doesn't need me to." The reporters leaned in, sensing something monumental was about to happen. Barron continued, his tone steady but filled with determination. "I came here today because for too long I stayed silent. For too long, I let the world tell me who I was. I let people assume that just because I was young, I didn't understand what was happening." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But I do." The room was utterly still, every eye fixed on him. "And that's why this will be the last time you ever see me silent," Barron declared, his voice growing stronger with each word. "From this day forward, I will not just be the son of a president, I will be a voice for those who refuse to be silenced." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters exchanged stunned glances, their pens frozen midair. Barron's announcement wasn't just a statement, it was a promise, a declaration of his intent to step into the spotlight and fight for those who felt overlooked and ignored. "I've seen the struggles of everyday Americans," he continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen my classmates' parents struggling to afford groceries. I've seen businesses shutting down because of reckless policies. I've seen veterans who sacrificed everything for this country still being ignored." He looked directly into the cameras, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to be poor to understand struggle. You don't have to suffer to care about people who do. And I care deeply." The room erupted into applause, a rare moment of unity in the often divided press corps. Even the most hardened journalists couldn't help but be moved by the sincerity and passion in Barron's words. As he stepped away from the podium, the weight of his announcement hung in the air. Barron Trump had not only defended his family, he had declared his intention to become a leader in his own right. His vow to be a voice for the unheard marked a turning point, not just for him, but for the nation. In that moment, Barron Trump wasn't just the son of a president. He was a young man ready to carve his own path and fight for the people who needed him most. The press briefing ended in stunned silence. Reporters, usually quick to chatter or scramble for the next headline, sat frozen in their seats. Barron Trump's words had cut through the noise, leaving an indelible mark on everyone in the room. Cameras continued to roll, capturing the rare moment of unity and reflection. Across America, viewers watched in awe, many wiping away tears as the youngest Trump son's heartfelt speech resonated deeply. Social media exploded with clips of his declaration, hashtags like #Barron Trump and #Voice for the Unheard trending within minutes. In the White House, Donald Trump sat in his private office, replaying the speech on his screen. His usually unreadable expression softened as he watched his son command the room with a maturity beyond his years. A rare smile crossed his face. "You did well," he said aloud, though no one was there to hear him. When Barron called him later, Trump's voice was filled with pride. "Better than I expected," he admitted, a hint of admiration in his tone. "You didn't just defend me, you found your voice. And once people start listening, they don't stop." Barron's speech wasn't just a defense of his father, it was a declaration of his own identity. He had vowed to be a voice for the unheard, and America was listening. Families gathered around their TVs, replaying the moment. Parents pointed to the screen telling their children, "That's what leadership looks like." Even some of Trump's harshest critics found themselves moved by Barron's sincerity and courage. A woman, tears streaming down her face, commented online, "I never thought I'd cry over a press briefing. But this wasn't just a speech. It was real." The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Politicians, pundits, and everyday Americans debated the significance of Barron's words. Some dismissed it as a calculated move, but most recognized it as a genuine moment of transformation. Barron Trump, once a quiet figure in the shadow of his famous family, had emerged as a leader in his own right. His promise to fight for those who felt unseen and unheard struck a chord in a divided nation. As the days passed, the speech continued to dominate headlines. Barron's name was everywhere, not as the son of a president, but as a young man with a powerful message. Donald Trump, watching from afar, knew this was just the beginning. Barron had found his voice, and America would never be the same. The quiet young man who had once stayed out of the spotlight was now stepping into it, ready to lead and inspire.